Hello again, Lawyer Forward audience. I am Mike Whalen. As you know, in this series of videos, we are talking about what comes next, right? We've all moved our practices online really fast. We put the documents on the web and the interwebs and the facey spacey, wherever these things go. We've got these virtual teams. We're trying to figure out how to work now. The question is, what do we do with our business models and product design and communications changes? All these things are really important for getting to the next step. And I've got friends like Jerod Morris here talking about it. Remember that in the Lawyer Forward Facebook group, we will be doing conversations around each of these videos. So you'll be able to go into a thread and look at the conversation, pinging ideas around like we used to do at the live event in the small group session. So make sure you look out for that. Jerod Morris is with me, friend of the show, as they say. He's been around at the conference and has agreed to talk about his new project. He is with Unemployable. There's a lot to learn there. Jerod, how are you surviving the apocalypse?
Day by day, like everybody else, I suppose. There's really no other way to do it, I don't think.
You're another one of those weirdos that was already working at home, was already
Yeah.
completely virtual. You could run your thing from Ecuador if you wanted to. And
Yes.
yet, the thing that has changed is the number of interruptions, right? Like,
Yes.
you're still doing the same thing you were doing before, but now you're just like, I can only do this like 2 hours a day. Why is everyone talking to me? Okay, sorry. That was self-talk.
No, but I can relate. I can definitely relate. I went from having my own office now to sharing my office with my wife. My daughter's home during the day, so it has been a process of finding very short windows to do some work sprints, and we're just making it like everybody else. So
We've now, while recording this series of videos, had 4 kid interruptions, one of them about bodily functions, 2 of them a child singing in the next room that I had to tell stop singing. So it's just, there's no control, people. It's
that's how it
2020,
goes.
relax. So,
That's right.
so speaking of 2020, you've been in the talking about content marketing game for a long time.
Yes.
And there were a lot of truisms of the content marketing world. A lot of them came from your partner at Unemployable, Brian Clark, who said things about owning your own website and you want to filter people there and build it as an asset. And now Brian is like, screw all of that. We've got a totally different idea of what we're supposed to do with content. So we're going to have, I mean, obviously some of those truisms still apply, blah, blah, blah. I'm sure you'd qualify that, but I'm being dramatic, Jerod. So now we've got new things to talk about. We're going to talk about curation. People, this sounds nerdy, but we're going to give you a better way to create lots of stuff that has more impact and gets you lots more information. So just stick with us. Pay attention. Trust me. Jerod,
Yes.
dig in. What are we talking about?
And it is nerdy, but that doesn't mean that it's not can also be exciting and useful and meaningful. So that's what
That's
we're
what
going to
I
try and
tell
do.
my wife, right? Well, I may be nerdy, but nerdy sexy. If we're
That's
being
right.
honest, a little mysterious. Like if James Bond were a dork, it works.
That's right.
It doesn't work.
That's
I
right.
need it.
To your point, I've spent the last 7, 8 years now learning content strategy and teaching content strategy. I've been really fortunate to learn from people like Brian Clark and work closely with him. A guy who pioneered content marketing and how to do it online. And to your point, a lot of those truisms that Brian has talked about, a lot of the fundamentals are the same. And a lot of those fundamentals were the same 100 years ago, and Brian learned the fundamentals and applied them to today. Just the tactics change, but the fundamentals of understanding an audience, putting together a message that is going to move people, all of those things, those stay the same. And what we're going to talk about today with curation is essentially a new tactic that, recognizes kind of the way that things have evolved and the opportunities that are presented by those things, where if you understand the fundamentals, now you can use this new tactic to have some of the success that people were having 5 years ago, 10 years ago, that you cannot now have following the same the same tactics that they were following. And so
Right.
that's the big idea here.
And one of the issues, and law is sort of a weird context because not many lawyers create many words, right? So theoretically, there's not a lot of words. But you know who did is the directories. And so there are these mega companies who are just putting out an insane number of words.
Yeah.
And so all these SEO companies are selling lawyers on the idea of I can get you on the first page of whatever. but Google controls the first half of the page with ads and Google My Business listings. And then
Yeah.
under that, you've got companies like FindLaw and Justia and Avo and all these big directory companies, because they're putting out huge resources. I sort of feel like that advice about put out a ton of words because you'll win the SEO game, at least we'll say, has gotten complicated.
Yeah, at best. At best. And it's funny that you mentioned that, because when I first got started in this, I was one of those folks, and I worked for an agency here in Dallas, and we worked with several lawyers, putting together SEO strategies for them at a time when that really worked, and at a time when you could put some of that basic content out there, get found, and it would make an impact. And I'm glad you're here. I'm glad that we're doing this together, because I really understand this strategy from a general perspective, and we work with a lot of freelancers and solopreneurs, but I don't understand the intricacies as much of how this will work for lawyers. And so I'm glad you're here, so we can talk about it in that way, and you can help guide it, for specifically how it's going to help lawyers. But when you look at what the problem is, and you just kind of hit on it, there's a problem for both content creators and content consumers with the way that the internet, that the web has evolved. And, for content creators, for the audience that's going to be watching this, the issue is that pretty much every beginning level, every intermediate level, and probably most advanced level topics have been covered, many times over. And as you just said, if you're looking on Google, ads are taking up that space. The big companies have their content in there. I mean, if you're trying to get found with SEO now, good luck. It's right. Just that is a difficult game, probably not one that's worth playing, because a lot of the low-hanging SEO fruit is gone, and even a lot of the long-tail SEO fruit is gone. And that's just, it's going to be different in every market, but certainly in this one, right. That is the case. And at the same time, you might think, okay, well, this abundance of content, this is great for content consumers. Not really. There is so much out there. When there are so many options out there for every single topic, when you're a content consumer, how do you discern what to trust? And how do you know how to fit it into a broader context that's actually going to matter in some meaningful way? You stumble upon this piece of content, you read it. It's like, all right, well, who wrote this? Do I trust this? What does it mean? Right. And so, so there's a big problem there. And the opportunity comes with, where you can kind of bring this oversupply and this demand issue together. So instead of focusing on creating all this new content that is probably just going to get lost in the morass of everything that's out there, you can really invest your time in finding the best of what already exists. Basically let others do the heavy lifting. And, as lawyers, do what you do best, read, right? I mean, that's, read and pick out the important information. And that's why, when you and I first talked about this, lawyers seem to me, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but they seem to have an especially appropriate level of training and experience in doing exactly this, because instead of just trying to provide value by adding to this morass of content, by putting something new out there that probably isn't really that new and isn't really covering new ground, no matter how well you think you may write it, you can instead position yourself as someone who adds value by being the one who sifts through this morass of content, finding the most important stuff, and adding context to it. And that is actually what's more valuable to readers now than just putting out something new that they have to go through. So that's the problem. That's the opportunity.
I'm going to get nerdy for you for a transition, because I think your point is right that lawyers are especially well positioned to do what we're going to talk about, to do it well. But we just don't know it. There's a book that I think in this context you would love. It's called Too Big to Know by David Weinberger. I read it recently. And his argument is that we used to have capital K knowledge, and we divided it into human brain-sized chunks. And we said, here's your chunk. So you're the law person, and over here, the doctor person will pay you when they need law person knowledge. The issue now is the network is so much smarter than any human brain-sized chunk. And so it's this massive information that sort of becomes the issue. And he makes the point that where experts used to be the people you would ask the question and they'd give the definitive final answer, now experts are sort of the people that start the answer, right? They're more like, you came to me with a question, let me lead you down a path of where you can find the answer. Let me add some color to it and some commentary to it. So I say all that to say this content curation opportunity that we're going to talk about does make a lot of sense for lawyers, But step one for that is to realize, dear lawyer, you're in a different expert context. You're not in the world anymore where people ask a question, you give them an answer, because they can already find that answer in 50 million just like it. The job for you is context, right? So let's talk about that. Let's shift to this curation opportunity. What does that word even mean? Does that mean that I'm retweeting Beyonce every time she does some? I don't know what Beyonce does on social media, but a Kardashian.
Well, that was a splendid transition until you went with Beyonce there.
Let's talk more Beyonce, buddy.
So let's talk about content curation, because this is, you take the problem, what opportunity does that create, and content curation fits in there. And a simple definition of content curation is the process of distilling and adding context to a crowded content marketplace. And so if we just kind of break down those words, because I don't want to take for granted, that everybody's going to kind of understand what that means in this context. Right. It is a process. Okay, curation is a process. It is not writing one blog post and putting it out there. The days of that being successful are done. Content curation needs to be done regularly, and it needs to be done over time to work. This is the way on the web that you build trust, that you build authority, that you build an audience, and that you learn about that audience. You can't do it in one shot. You've got to do it over time. All right. So then we talk about distilling, because it's the process of distilling. This is exactly what it sounds like. We talked about the overabundance of what's out there. You are extracting the most important and essential pieces of content that illuminate something meaningful to an audience member. So, when we talk about, what are the fundamentals that have been true forever and that are still true now? None of this works. No content strategy works if you don't know who you're serving and if you don't understand what their problems, dreams, hopes, desires are. Okay, so all of this has to be built on that foundation. But when you do that, you can now do this process of distilling the essential pieces that these people need to know and that they want to know. Okay? So the process of distilling and adding context to. And this is the really important part of curation, and this is where people, who get it wrong. Because, you've probably seen like link roundups, where people just put together a roundup of links. And that is a form of curation. It's a very simplistic, misguided, and almost surely not going to be successful form of curation. Because what good curators do, and to get the most out of this, is you got to add context to it. So this is where you matter, and your voice actually matters. This is where you can build your own understanding better. And this is where you can demonstrate your authority, because it's not just about going out and rounding up some good content and sending people elsewhere. It's about placing this content into a useful context and explaining to an audience why it matters and how it ties into a meaningful big picture. So if I'm subscribed to your newsletter, Mike, or however you're doing your curation, and you're telling me, hey, go read this, you're not just sending me out to read it. You're saying, this is why the subject matter is important. This is something that I took away from it and that you should, think about with this. And this is why it can have a broader impact on your life because of X. And now, not only am I going to this article and reading it, but there's a lot of trust that is being built with you. There's authority that's coming onto you, and hopefully in the process of doing that, you're learning more about an audience and the subject matter too. So the process of distilling and adding context to a crowded content marketplace. And this last part is easy. This is what we've been talking about. So many different content marketplaces are jam-packed with content, and the layperson just isn't going to be able to find, the most important stuff. And that's most content marketplaces. Now, the one exception, and I don't think this is going to apply to many people here, but maybe it will, and you can let me know, is if there is not an abundance of content about a topic, then it might be time for you to write it. Okay, and that does happen. And there are some, very small audience segments now that don't have anything out there about what they're interested in, and curation might not work there. So that's why this is important. Curation works in a crowded content marketplace, but that's the definition, the process of distilling and adding context to a crowded content marketplace. And if you don't have all of those elements in there, then it's like four legs of a table. You've got to have all of that in there for it to work. And if you do, then this is a strategy that has an opportunity to be really, really valuable.
Yeah, it reminds me of, we could probably Seth Godin fanboy all day. I seem to just be quoting him a lot recently, but it reminds me, on my Twitter profile, it says that I'm a nerd impresario. And what I mean by that is that I bring people like you know, this conference, this event together to talk about this sort of nerdy thing of practicing law in 2020. But the impresario Godin talks about is the host. It's the person that organizes and brings these minds together. And in the case of the actual term, it comes from opera, organizing operas. But being the organizer, being the host, the person that brings the content, the context, and makes the decisions and whatever, just puts you in this really sort of elevated position in terms of visibility, while not having the pressure to know everything, right? Like you get the benefit of being able to add that human piece,
Yeah.
but without having to know everything, right? It's more adapted to this moment. And while you were talking, I was actually you had listed some examples in this outline, and I didn't know what comp quantum was, and so just looked it up. A really interesting law specific example. We'll talk
Yeah.
about some other examples, but tell me about that one. I had never seen this one before.
So Comp Quantum, this is a guy, Eric Johnson, who's actually in the Unemployable Initiative. So he's in this community of folks, where we're learning about content strategy, learning about curation. And so he has a newsletter that's associated with it where he basically goes through and looks through all this case law in Louisiana. It's specific to Louisiana. And the way he describes it is the latest critical cases to your inbox with concise summaries and commentary. So essentially doing some of the legwork for folks so that they can, get it distilled to the stuff that they need to know. And he had a law practice, so he knows what people need to know. So it's a perfect marriage of understanding the audience and giving them information and saving them time.
Right.
And then he's also, his entire service is basically a curated service. He's got these online tools for trial and appellate court case law research that provide the most up-to-date and comprehensive personal injury options available to Louisiana lawyers. So what settlements have been, what the awards have been, I guess, so people, so the lawyers know what to ask for, what's reasonable. My understanding of it is obviously very limited, but I do know it's very successful, and it's an excellent example of curation, because that is essentially what he is doing.
Yeah, it's such and I'm looking at the front page, and they quote Parker Larison, who's somebody I know. He's in a group that I'm in, and he points out, like, before I discovered it, he says, I struggled to find effective quantum data for my personal injury law practice, meaning that for the user, for the person who you're creating that for, they were having to do a bunch of work, each of them individually, right? If you've got 100 personal injury lawyers, it used to be that each one was doing the same research as the other one, right? Over and over again.
Yeah.
And in the same way, these other examples that you've got listed, I love Dave Pell's Next Draft is a great example. All of the users that you're talking about were previously having to go find content. They were swimming through the sea of all the craziness, and for one person to do it and then to be the person who passes it on is a service, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's a great service.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, and we're going to get into talking about what are some of the benefits of this, but like for Eric, who, I don't know his full story, but, he transitioned out of having a law practice to do this. Now he's, got a lot of authority in this space. He's learning from these other lawyers, and he's able to develop other services that are going to help them,
Right.
and so it's, and that's what you see, Further is another one, that about how to be successful in middle age, and Brian Clark goes and finds all of these different resources to help people do that. So, you're seeing more and more, just like with Dave Pell and Next Draft and distilling the news, how much value there is in that. And I'd never thought of it from that perspective, but you're right. If you were to calculate the actual total time spent, individual plus individual plus individual, on and on,
Right.
it saves so much time, and that's why it's a valuable service.
Oh, yeah. Well, and we started into this a little bit, the benefits to the curator, especially as the host. One of the things that's, I've got 20 people who are participating in this conference as speakers, and each of those people is going to share this thing with their group. That's the thing with being the host, is you start spreading that influence and, using the content of others, right? Using the legwork of others, because you're doing that context, that audience connection, that empathy. You're doing that work for people that they really care about. So let's dig deeper into that. Tell me about the benefits to me, as opposed to sitting and writing. If I've got an hour to write blog posts, why do this instead?
Yeah. Okay. So the number one benefit is, and so there are 4 benefits here, and really it's impossible to rank them because the value of each benefit is going to depend on your context and what you want to get out of it. So don't infer some sort of, like value or ranking based on how we're listing them. But the first one that we'll talk about is building an audience asset. And if you're smart about this, you're going to do it by email. You're not going to build a Twitter following. You're not going to build a Facey Spacey account, as you mentioned earlier. You're going to do this by email. It is just the smartest, the most consistent. That's the one that you own. So you want to build, an email list. And again, it comes back to those fundamentals. You have to have an understanding of the who you're talking to, what the problems, desires are that they have. And if you get this right, curate accordingly, people are going to keep paying attention to you. They're going to start trusting you, and some will eventually recommend or hire you. And, as your email list grows, it becomes powerful because what you have with an email list is a captive audience that you can communicate with on your own terms. Nothing else gives you that. No social media channel gives you that. Not even just putting out, putting out a blog gives you that. When you have people on an email list, you know that your message is getting into their inbox. Now, it will be up to them to choose to open it, but you're at least going to have a shot because you've got a subject line that they're going to see. So it's a captive audience that you can communicate with on your own terms, and it is, without question, and all the data backs this up, the best channel for direct and referral sales on the web. Now, for this audience, I don't know what kind of, sales you're going to be doing, and so I don't know the value of that. But if that is something that you're looking to do, then having an email list is going to do it. So, but even if you're not selling, just having that asset. And the reason why it's an asset is because, again, if people have opted into a list with you, you control it. So I have my list on ConvertKit. If ConvertKit changes their terms, if they do something I don't like, I can take that and I can go somewhere else with it. And at worst, I could just type those, addresses into my own email client and put them in. Like, it's an asset. I can use it how I want to. You don't get that with social media. You don't get that with really anything else.
Well, and one of the things, one of the foundations of the book, Lawyer Forward, is that the law firm business model as practice is a cash flow driven model. It's you're as good as your next hour, your next client. We're not building on assets. This is a transferable asset, right?
Yes.
And right now is actually a great example because, like, I've got a lot of lawyers who are like, man, I need to diversify my income stream because I can't go to court. I should add estate planning on there, doing some simple estate plans. Imagine you had an email list of 5,000 people and you were like, hey guys, I'm doing this cool thing. Whatever your conversion rate, it's a heck of a lot more than 0, which is what you have.
Even if it's 1%, which is a relatively low conversion rate. I mean, that's going to be powerful.
That's just quick money. And we talked about Brian Clark earlier. He built Copyblogger over a lot of years. And he recently sold it. And that audience, right, that email list was a transferable asset for him to be able to turn to somebody else and say, hey, here's an audience value. It will generate you money in this way if you talk to this audience. Build on assets, and this email list is a great asset.
Yes. So that's one benefit, building that audience asset. The next benefit is related to this one, which is that you're going to gain a deeper understanding of your audience over time. Right. So, you've got to go into this with some semblance of understanding of who you're serving, what they need from you. But that's going to develop. And the way that it's going to develop is just from the data and from the interaction. Especially if you're building an email list, you're going to be able to have really simple metrics for what do people open, what do they click on, what compels replies. If you send out something and all of a sudden 10 people reply to you with questions, it's like, whoa, that really struck a nerve. Okay, so this is really something that people are interested in. So when you take a topic area, and obviously then you're going to split it up and find different angles to approach it, now each one you get to see, which one of these really, really strike a chord. What questions do people have, what falls flat, all of that stuff. And so that data that you get and that understanding really helps over time. And the only way to truly get it and deepen it is just to keep putting stuff out there and see how people react. And every time you gain a little bit more, and that there's that feedback that you get. And then the other thing that you are going to be able to learn from this is, what gaps are there that are actually out there? Because even in a crowded marketplace, there are going to be some gaps. Not enough gaps that you can make it your entire strategy, but enough that you could find some really useful opportunities, maybe one-off opportunities, to create some long form content that would satisfy some, underserved or emerging needs and questions, because this stuff is always changing. And so, what people were searching for in SEO 6 months ago may not be what they're searching for 3 months from now. And if you have a good understanding of that and there's nothing out there, it's like, hey, okay, maybe I can put this out there and now I will surface for that. But those are opportunities that you're only going to find if you're really deep in this stuff. And so that is one other benefit that you'll get from this deeper understanding. And then, the final one is, what products or services does this audience need? And this goes right back to the example that you just gave. We're in an opportunity now where people can't go to court.
Right.
It's really just put over here in the ideas file, and now the opportunity is better.
Right.
Hey, I already know what they want. You're not guessing,
I'm and we're in this moment, right, that people actually want it. I
Yeah.
keep pointing this out. We're really focused on cash. Cash is the number 2 killer of businesses in the United Small businesses. The number 1 killer is actually you're making something nobody wants, right?
Yeah.
And we're all really worried about cash right now, but really having that data of knowing what somebody wants is so valuable. I will selfishly, my business is I have two. I have the Lawyer Forward group, and it's attorneys, practicing attorneys, and I don't sell much to that group. That's not the purpose in that. I mostly just give, right? I'm just giving to that audience, and what I get back from them is information about their experience, what they're going through, what they need help with, and then I'm going to these legal technology companies and service companies, and to them, they'll always say, "Oh, Mike, you have your finger on the pulse of this." It's just because I talk to them, right? Like it's because I talk to you guys. I'm not doing anything magical. That interaction that those companies, those vendors don't have, really tough for them to have, that is a point of value. So for you too, if you've got a law firm and you've got some audience built around an issue that you care about and they care about, they're going to tell you what they like. That is an asset. It might be just for your firm to be able to say, oh, I need to pivot to a new product. You might be able to monetize it or create value from it to other firms or to other companies to be able to turn to them. And even if it's just giving social capital, if you do a report out to other lawyers who are referral sources and say, look at this data I'm getting from my users, this is what they're worried about right now, those other lawyers would highly value that, right? And again, even if it's just to feed referral sources, that is a great use of an asset. That is people. Read the book. This is an asset-driven model, not a cash flow driven model. I also talk a lot in the book about building expertise, and I know that the next on the list was building your own expertise. Tell me about that.
Yeah, when you and I had a conversation about this a couple weeks ago, this is the one that you really zeroed in on as being really valuable. And I agree with you. And it's probably the one that we underplay the most when we're teaching this and when we're explaining this. And so I found that feedback from you to be really, really insightful. And because this is another benefit, is you can build your own expertise and you can satisfy a desire to keep learning. Because curation at its heart is a process of discovery. And, if you do it right, which again means don't just bullet point a bunch of hastily chosen blog post links. If you do it right, you're going to develop a deeper understanding of your field and this is the other important part, not just develop a deeper understanding of the field by, reading and finding these different sources, but you're going to improve your ability to communicate your understanding to others. Right. Because that is what the process of adding context is taking these different sources, putting the context on it so you're learning and gaining insight and gaining new understandings and new knowledge, and then you're communicating it. And boy, when you add those two things together, that's going to help you in whatever you're doing because you're learning more stuff, and as you get better at communicating it, it continues. It makes you someone who is more worthy of authority and just continues to, to add to what you know and what you're capable of doing.
Yeah, it's so funny because I don't consider myself an expert in this. In the book, I identify these two kinds of, are you an expert freelancer or are you an audience building solopreneur? This comes from a conversation between Brian and Seth. But but people think I'm an expert, which is so funny because all I did in the book was go steal from other smart people, right? It was that act of curation and creation that made me question, what do I know, right? The act of writing tells you what you know, right? It gets
Mhm.
that you're teaching, and teaching is a better teacher than being the listener. And so for me, I really was just bringing together a bunch of other smart people framed in a way that could be understood. And now people bring me in as the expert.
Yeah.
I'm just curating other people's research, but they bring me in as the expert because I've taken the time to understand, what's out there. I this is an exciting untapped for lawyers who are being encouraged to do rote work, to systematize more. Your firm should be systematized, but you personally will get brain melted. Your brain will shrink. Literally, there's a chapter in the book about this. Your brain will shrink if you're not doing creative work. This is a great way to do that creative expertise building work.
Yep. And then the last benefit, this is one that you hit on a little bit before, is build your network. You're going to be ostensibly curating the work of thought leaders in your industry.
Mm.
And I'm assuming that it would be useful to have these people in your network. And there are few conversation starters better in an online context than reaching out without an ask just to let them know that you featured their work. It's a great way to start to build that network, to kind of pay it forward and do something nice for somebody, and now they know who you are, and it's a conversation starter. And so this is another one that people don't think about quite as much, but it can really build up over time. And if you're smart about it, and I think this was kind of your suggestion earlier, it could even be part of your referral strategy, and it could be part of your business model. So that's one that I would not overlook, which is the power of curation to build your network.
Yeah, Mark Homer in another session gave the example of Mo, the Mo Show. And, he's in this community. He's got sort of a hyper-local curation model, we'll call it. And what he does is just brings different people from the community onto the show. And it's a fascinating outcome because what happens is that he's doing these interviews with, like, the high school basketball team, with the local weatherman, with the chiropractor, and he's doing all these interviews. Then what all those people are doing is they share to their network that interview, right? It was that act of curation, of hosting, of playing the host, the impresario role, that
Yeah.
made it so he's now got attached to networks that he had no relationship with. And previously he'd had to pay for access to those networks, right?
Mm-hmm.
But now he's able to get them by being the host. I just think it's a very cool use case. So let's say we're sold, right? We want to do this. We want to build our expertise, build our profile, those connections, focus on assets. Get a little tactical for me. How do I get started with this?
I think the first thing, again, I think it needs to come back to email. So I think the first thing would be to figure out, just what your email infrastructure is going to be. And that can be as simple as going and signing up at ConvertKit or whatever place you're going to be, so that you can begin from the beginning doing this via email and having a place for people to sign up via email. That is an important, first, second, or third step, whatever order you want to do it in. I think the other thing that you've really got to do is kind of figure out, okay, what area am I going to tackle with curation? What topic areas am I interested in and do I know about? And then what audiences is it going to be useful for me to serve? To where it's a worthwhile investment of my time, not just a side hustle, because that's what we're talking about here, is something that's going to help a practice.
Right.
It'd be different if it's just something you want to do on the side because you like music and you want to curate about music. This isn't really what we're talking about. So, what audience are you going to serve? And then try and find the merging of those two, between the topic areas and the audience, and start to I think brainstorm probably 5 to 10 different areas that you can begin with to go learn about, find sources about, and plan a few issues of your newsletter. And look, there's different ways to curate. If you're not someone who wants to write and do it that way, you can curate with a podcast. You can curate with a video series. You're curating with virtual events. Like, there are other ways to do it. But I think to simplify it, email is the best way to go, because with those other ways, you're still going to want to drive people back to email, and you're going to want to give them value via email. And a curated email newsletter is one of the simplest and most proven ways to do that. So I think you've got to know what your email infrastructure is, no matter what your strategy is going to be. You've got to have an initial plan for what your topic and your audience is. And then I think you want to try to put together the beginnings, the outline, the scaffolding of a curation process. And this is going to evolve as you go, but what are some sources that you want to go to? What are some books that you want to read or revisit that will give you, some good information? I think it's so important in the beginning to build momentum. And so I think figuring out what the low-hanging fruit is for you, the topics that you could really just bang out some stuff, easily write about, 5 or 10 issues, and find some sources for, so you build some momentum. And then as you go, you'll have to branch out a little bit more. Maybe you go look in a new topic area. But I think in the beginning, figure out what that low-hanging fruit is for you. And so then when you do that, now you've got something that you're ready to publish. It can start to interact with an audience, and you learn, and then that feedback loop starts to direct where you go from there.
Let me add some context to it, again, with my nerdiness.
Please.
I think part of this, you mentioned figuring out what you're going to talk about and what audience you're going to talk to. I think part of this depends on your positioning, and I've been talking about this a lot.
Yes.
If you've got a horizontal positioning, meaning you're focused on a problem, you don't care where that problem takes place. You just want to help people with that problem, right? So I give the example in the book of the cow lawyer. If you're the lawyer in rural Goliad, Texas, you care about livestock as property, you're sort of running like a consulting firm that sells legal services around this problem. You're not going to do a hyper local, let's talk about events in the community kind of newsletter. That's not the curation that makes any sense for that kind of positioning.
Right.
If you're doing horizontal positioning around livestock problems, your audience is policymakers, it's livestock owners, it's professors, and your subject is around what's going on with this, livestock issues as applied to you're focused on the problem. So know that that's going to drive some of your audience choices and what you talk about. Similarly, if you've got a vertical positioning, you care about a kind of people, right? Not a kind of problem, but a kind of people. Well, that's going to drive a lot of your subject and how you communicate to them as well. So if your vertical is, family parents in Austin, right? Middle-class parents in Austin. Now, talking to them about local events makes a whole lot of sense because that's who you're talking to. So I'm going to steal from David Baker on this and say that it always comes back to positioning. But in order to figure out how to use this strategy well, you've got to figure out who you're serving and start with figuring out that positioning. That'll drive a lot of this, I think.
It strikes me that, right there, this was basically a live version of curation. It's like you just verbally linked out to Jerod Morris's article about 3 ways to get started with curation and then put it into context for this audience. It's like, here's the general tip, and this is how we place it into context so it means something for you.
Professional people.
It was really good.
Just like we planned it. So
yes.
I want people to be able to know what to do next. And so this is sort of putting you on the spot, but I'm going to ask you to curate a little bit and help us to make some decisions. You and I could probably list off 10 email service providers and 20, tools for gathering content and whatever. I'm going to ask you to give me the top few, right? Start with this to, narrow down your content. Start with this to do some email. Narrow me down to a few tools to start with.
So if you're looking at email services, like I've mentioned ConvertKit, I don't think ConvertKit is actually the best place to start because it's a little bit expensive. It could be. It's my favorite one, so I will certainly recommend it. But if you really just want to dip your toes in and don't want to make a big, create a big expense early on, something like a MailChimp or a place that gives you a free email service is a great place to go. Because
I think they're free up to 500 contacts.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Something like that. And it's pretty easy. If you've never done this before, once you build your email list, you can export it really easily and transfer it someplace. Right. So I would not overcomplicate that decision. I think, the next thing from a tools perspective is something like Feedly is really, really helpful. And Feedly is basically an RSS reader, an RSS aggregator. So you could go in there and you can create some different topics and you can pull in some RSS feeds. And an RSS feed is basically like, a blog or any type of publication. It just updates whenever there's new content, it updates. And now in Feedly, you can basically personalize your own little news magazine so that every time something updates, you don't have to have 10 of these places bookmarked and go check them every single day. You just pop into Feedly. Hey, here's all the new content. You can split it up by category. You can have different boards so that if you see something, it's like, oh, that'd be good for this topic. Just click it and it goes there. It can really help you make that process simpler.
Feedly. Curse the death of Google Reader.
Gosh, yes.
Did love
yes, I loved that.
Feedly's a decent replacement.
It is. And then the another tool that some people have found useful for this, if you're kind of in the beginning and you don't know a lot about the audience yet, and you maybe don't know what people are interested in, Google Trends is a place that you can go and just do some very basic, high-level research about what people are looking for and interested in. If you have a hypothesis that you want to test for people interested in this, not necessarily because you're going to do it for SEO, but just is there an interest, a demonstrated interest out there in this, Google Trends is a place to go to put in some search terms and just see how active are the searches on this, because that's usually a decent approximation for what are people interested in. And so, I think those are some great tools to start with, but, choosing that email service provider and then just having a process for how you're going to pull content together with Feedly, those are great places to start.
Yeah, and people ask me all the time, what's my favorite legal tech tool? I always answer the humble Post-it note. And Moleskine notebooks too. I think if you're going to do this work of being the kind of person who's seeing things, right? Again, Seth Godin, somebody asked him what his job is. He said, my job is to notice things, which I think is just a fantastic description of this kind of work. We're just noticing things. You've got to get in the habit of putting stuff down, right?
Yes.
Of taking it out of your brain, putting it on something in a way, however you do that. If you're an Evernote user, then do that some way too, as ideas pop. Because again, you're adding context, which means you're going to be reading a bunch, but just reading doesn't get you there. That's not the job. Anybody can read stuff. Feedly is really important because it'll put the stuff in front of you in a semi-organized way, but your job is to add context. So make sure you're getting your thoughts down however you do that.
Yes. And the other thing that I would add there on top of that, and thank you for saying that because that's an important one, is to have a place for snippets of thoughts. And I think this is what you were driving at. Sometimes your article or your full email is not just going to magically pop into your head at once, but you might have like a thought about this. And you mark it down, and then that connects with something 3 weeks later that you read, and it's like, ooh, here's an issue of this newsletter that's starting to come together. But if you lost that earlier thought, you may not be able to connect it to this new one. So just the process of writing down, obviously, as we know, helps us to retain it, but also just having those things there, because what will happen with any type of curation strategy, and I always recommend going for the low-hanging fruit first, but as you get into it, you're going to kind of be faced, oh crap, I put this thing out on Thursday, it's Wednesday night, I don't know what I'm going to write about yet. And if you have a place that you can go to and look for some of those old ideas, a lot of times they'll spark something that gets you going. And it just helps you kind of keep that process and that, because again, it is a process, it helps you keep that going.
Well, and I think I wanted to ask you, I think for you and me, it's easy to think in terms of assets that build over time, right? We know that when you start a thing like this, it's going to take time for it to yield results. But you're talking to an audience that is in a cash flow driven business model that's like, where do I get my next hour, my next case? How would you suggest people use their time in these early stages in a way that they commit enough to it, but that they're not jeopardizing their ability to feed their family? How do you use this time?
That's a really good question. And obviously that'll depend on each person, but I would just try to keep it simple early on. Try to keep it simple, write some good, early newsletters, some good early content, try to get it out to people to get them to subscribe, but don't, here's the thing about the early issues and early blog posts, a lot of times you don't really want a ton of people seeing them.
They suck, is what we're saying.
Because they're not always as good. It's almost like a TV show. Like TV shows tend to take like 7 to 8 episodes to really kind of get their groove.
Right.
I was reading the guy that wrote like Parks and Rec and some other ones,
Yep.
and he's like, I kind of wish people did not see the first 8, and you could just record them, throw them away, and then start after that. That's kind of how it goes for content like this until you find your voice, and you might try a few different formats. So I would, focus the majority of the time on writing it, and you kind of put it out there maybe to some, to a few trusted folks, but I wouldn't worry a whole lot about promoting it and doing all of that stuff, early on. Focus on getting a process down.
I say make this a 12-week year project, right? If you've ever read the book 12-Week Year, it is the idea that you do something in 12 weeks that would normally you'd put off for a year, right? Like shorten the horizon. This is a really good, I'm going to give this thing 12 weeks, right? I'm going to put something, here's my deliverables I want out of this. Here's the good I want out of it. If success would look like this, failure would look like this. Give yourself that 12-week time frame. And at that point, if you're like, ooh, this is working, I can now optimize using this other tool, or I can learn copywriting so that my emails are more persuasive, or whatever. Make that the next 12-week year project. Don't try to do this all in a week, please. So yes, Jerod,
great advice.
If people want to kind of dig more into this, I know that you're writing and talking and recording podcasts and doing a lot of work around this right now. If people want to learn more about it and try to map out what a 12-week year might look like, what's the best way to get in touch with you and learn some more?
I think if you are interested in this, I think a great step is to go to the website nextlevel7.com. And this is an offshoot of Unemployable. And basically, Brian created a webinar called The Curation Code, where he outlined some of this, the big picture, some of the process stuff. And so we distilled that into a 5 or 6 email series. So it's bite-sized chunks, easy to digest. Nextlevel7.com. It's free. So just put your email, address in there. You will get this. At the end of that, there is a call to action to our full course on this. It is a full, 4 or 5 week course, 8-9 week course actually, right. That really goes into the bigger picture. How do you actually figure out an audience? How do you do some of this stuff? And so if you really want to go next level, that will be there for you. But even just the email sequence will give you, kind of some more about what we've talked about today. And, if you have questions as you go there, any of those emails, just reply to them and we'll be able to follow up and answer any questions. So
awesome.
That'd be the best thing to do.
It's a very good course. I've taken it myself. I appreciate you being here, Jerod. Again, everyone, remember who is watching this. If you are watching this when it releases on the 16th and 17th, in the next couple of weeks, we're going to have one of these Facebook watch parties where we'll bounce ideas around. We'll show other examples of people who are doing this. We'll talk to you about what do you want to try. If you're watching this into the future, you can go back and find that thread as well and be able to participate, tag on to that conversation. Jerod, I thank you for all your wisdom, your wonderful hair, your beautiful voice. It is always good to see you. Stay strong in the apocalypse. I will see you not in person, maybe ever, but I will see I will see you on the interwebs. Thank you, buddy.
Absolutely. Always my pleasure nerding out with you, Mike.
Thanks, brother.